Hi, and today is Friday. Thank Crunchy. And yesterday, Roman and Darren got into a lot of trouble with poor Mr. Wiggles. So, today's part of the chapter is called Two Guilty Monkeys. I swear Rosie Taylor had never looked so pleased as when she returned with Mrs. MacDonald a minute later. Jane Dixon was behind them, her face pale. Gamble and I stood to attention next to each other, blocking off Mr. Wiggles' cage. Hi, miss, said Gamble, hiding the glue pot behind his back. We both smiled innocently at each other, and as much as we could to Mrs. MacDonald. Mrs. MacDonald frowned. Why are you grinning like that? You look like two guilty monkeys. More like a pair of serial killers, yawned Mrs. Clegg, lolloping into the room. Weren't you supposed to be watching? Began Mrs. MacDonald, but Miss Clegg interrupted her. I needed the loo, curry night, she said, wafting her hand up and down in front of her nose. Oh, TMG, said Rosie. Too much grimation. Miss, said Jane, please can we go somewhere else and talk about the old people's tea party? What's that by the sink? Said Mrs. MacDonald. I felt the sweat on my neck turn cold. Doughnut, miss, said Gamble casually. Guess what? There's a competition, right? And I'm going to win a year's supply and share it with you, miss, because I love you, miss. Well, that's very kind of you, Darren, but what's the doughnut? Excuse me. What's the doughnut doing there? Bit of a tongue twister for a Friday. Mrs. MacDonald looked at it. Her eyes narrowed. Did you take it out of the cupboard? I thought I told you. She stalked towards like a hungry leopard. Gamble and I huddled closer together. It felt like a cold fist was twisting my intestines. Don't worry, miss, said Gamble calmly. We saved you a bit, look. He thrust the well-nibbled doughnut under Mrs. MacDonald's nose and she snatched it off of him. I'm not interested. She'd seen Mr. Wiggles. Mrs. MacDonald flung the lump of doughnut on the worktop and shoved past me and Gamble. Then she pulled open the cage and scooped the guinea pig up. What have you done? She yelled. Her face had actually turned purple and her eyes were bulging out like big balls. I don't know what you're talking about, miss, said Gamble innocently. Mrs. MacDonald was panting heavily. Her free hand gripped the sink for support. Shall I get your behaviour book, miss? Said Rosie Taylor. Mrs. MacDonald let out a howl from somewhere deep in her chest. Gamble looked surprised. Are you angry, miss? I could see where she was coming from. Mr. Wiggles was bald, which was bad enough, but on his skin were random patches of stuck-on hair and crusty bits of glue. Unfortunately, he'd also stuck to some pencil shavings, some glitter and a few crumbs of doughnut along the way, and as well as a couple of pink feathers that Gamble thought might look nice. He looked like he just had a fight with the art cupboard. What have you done? Screamed Mrs. MacDonald again. I looked at my shoes. I'm sorry. Mrs. MacDonald placed Mr. Wiggles down next to the sink. Sorry? Sorry? You're sorry? He's ruined. I'll be the laughing stock at the British Championships. Well, you could get him a wig, miss, said Gamble helpfully. Mrs. MacDonald didn't seem to hear him. She was pacing up and down, talking loudly to himself. He'll have to retire now. 2 years of training and grooming wasted, I say. What will you do with him now? You can't put him in the shows, miss, said Gamble, revving up with an excitement idea again. Will you eat him? We had this cat once right at... Oh, be quiet, you awful child, screeched Mrs. MacDonald, jabbing Gamble in the chest with a stubby finger. It was her finger. "Oh, please, miss," said Miss Gamble, his lip wobbling. "Don't be like that, miss. I was just trying to help. I couldn't stand it if you were mad at me, miss." Gamble looked like he was about to cry. Couldn't believe it, but I actually felt sorry for him. "Miss MacDonald, it was me as well," I said, looking at the floor. "You too, you little—" she screamed. Now, I'll never know the reasons for what happened next. Maybe Mr. Wiggles understood what Gamble had said about his cat. Maybe he was scared of the noise of Mrs. MacDonald screaming. Or maybe he just saw the doughnut and noticed no one was looking at him and thought he'd make a break for it. Anyway, with surprise speed for such a fat rodent, he darted forward and bit off a wodge of the doughnut, and then he shot away behind the sink and along the worktop. Mrs. MacDonald dived towards him. She was too late. Mr. Wiggles had already squeezed himself through the hole in the wall where the pipes go. She hauled open the door of the cupboard under the sink and desperately pulled out the paintbrushes and palettes and glue sticks. There was no sign of him. From the other side of the hollow wall, we could hear a scuffling noise, which became quieter and quieter before turning silent. "He's gone," said Mrs. MacDonald softly. Mrs. Clegg sniffed. "They always go somewhere peaceful to die." Not really helpful, I thought. There was a thud as Mrs. MacDonald fainted and collapsed to the floor. Wow, that's the end of today's chapter, and next week the first chapter will be called Flat Out, and I'm assuming that's regarding Mrs. MacDonald because she's flat on the floor, but we will find out on Monday. See you then.